In this video, I'm not going to tell you which leadership skills you should be developing. I have plenty of other videos on that subject. Instead, I'm going to talk about how to go about developing as a leader, how to develop leadership skills. And this video will be useful to you whether you're already a leader or not. Hey, how's it going? This is Scruffy Leadership, a YouTube channel about management and leadership. My name's Ben, and I've been a leader and a manager in the tech industry for over 25 years. Okay, first, let me start by saying leadership skills can be learned. I'm not saying everyone has the ability to be as good a leader as anyone else, because I'm not really sure that's true. But I do believe that anyone can learn leadership skills. Everyone can learn to be a better leader than they are now. Leadership, in other words, is not something you just have to be born with. You can learn the skills. And secondly, these skills don't just come by doing the job. In other words, while you can grow as a leader just by being a leader, doing the job, it's important to make use of more deliberate methods of learning. And that's what I really want to focus on in this video. The first and most obvious way, perhaps, is to learn from other leaders. And this can come in a few forms. So number one, learn by watching other leaders. Importantly, pick leaders that you respect, that you think lead in the way you want to lead. Just because someone is a senior leader doesn't mean their way of leading will work for you, and it doesn't even mean that they're necessarily a good leader, unfortunately. So start by forming your own view of who the best leaders are that you have around you. Hopefully your boss is one of them, and just watch what they do. Watch how they engage in meetings, watch how they deal with mistakes and setbacks, watch what they do in a situation that makes you think, I'm glad I didn't have to deal with that, and watch how they lead. Number two, learn by talking to other leaders, and this really means finding a mentor. Particularly one of those good leaders from item one, but someone you feel comfortable being vulnerable with. The point is that you need to be able to ask them honest questions, including admitting to them when you're stuck, when you don't know what to do. And when you ask them that kind of question, don't just do what they say. Think about why. Why is that their advice? Does it make sense to you? If not, ask them for more thoughts. Why did they recommend that course of action? What experience led them to it? And this applies if you're currently not in a leadership position, but are thinking about moving in that direction. In fact, that's probably the perfect time to find a leadership mentor. Number three, this is a big bucket. Learn by reading books, watching YouTube videos like this one, for example, listening to podcasts and audiobooks, attending training courses, and pretty much through any medium that you can use for learning. But once again, don't just let yourself be shaped by the first book you pick up or by the most famous billionaire. Be critical and ask yourself constantly which of the advice you're receiving makes sense to you, feels right to you, matches your values. There's no point trying to become a Steve Jobs if you're more of a Steve Wozniak. Number four, and this one has a special place in my heart, learn by watching bad leaders. I'm sorry to say that there will almost certainly be some bad leaders around you. Think about what they do that you don't like. Be careful. Ask yourself, is it really that they're a bad leader, or do you just not like them? Or are you holding a grudge against them for something that happened in the past? But in a way, maybe it doesn't matter too much. If you observe some repeated behavior from a leader and you can see the harm that behavior has, see what lesson you can learn from it. It's not necessarily about just doing the opposite. Sometimes you can learn a broader lesson by observing how a good leader's traits contrast with those of a less skilled leader. Okay, so these first four approaches are about learning from other leaders. The remaining tips in this video are about learning by doing, learning from your own experiences. And some of these require you to already be in a leadership position, but not all of them. So number five, you can try co-leading something. This is a double-edged sword. Co-leadership can be confusing and stressful if it's not done well. But if you co-lead with a more experienced leader, it can be an amazing opportunity to observe them up close. I've had this opportunity a few times in my career, and I've probably learned more from it about good and bad leadership than any other single approach. If you do go with this approach, just make sure you have great clarity about how things work. In particular, it's important that your team knows who to escalate things to, who to look for advice from, who they're going to get their performance review from, and so on. In other words, you can't just be an undifferentiated pair of twins sharing everything. People need to know, for example, that they come to you for technical approvals and your co-lead for project matters. Number six, experiment. Obviously, you need to be a little careful how you go about this, but the truth is that if you only make decisions or take actions when you have total confidence, you'll never do anything, and you certainly won't develop as a leader. So you're going to take risks, and probably quite often. So start being deliberate about it. When you come across a situation in which you're not sure how to proceed and you have two options that both seem reasonable and you don't know how to pick between them, just pick one and make a mental note to try the other one next time. It's not usually going to be quite as clear cut and simple as that. So in reality, it might be more like picking where on a spectrum to be, slightly more this way or slightly more that way. But Whatever it is that you're doing, be deliberate and conscious. Maybe even keep a record of the decisions you make and the actions that you take. Note down what your choices were and the things you considered, and then when you have a result, note that too. If you're a very data-driven person, you might find this a very appealing way to develop your leadership skills. But do remember one thing, don't try out ideas that you think are bad just to see if they work. Maybe you're finding that nothing you try is getting through to a difficult employee and you're considering just yelling at them in front of the team next time they step out of line. Don't do that. In that kind of situation, you need to try something else. Perhaps one of the other ideas I've mentioned in this video already, talking to a mentor, for example. But as long as the things you do don't contradict your values and the values of your organization, you should consider experimentation within reasonable bounds to be a valid way of learning more about leadership and about yourself as a leader. 7, learn from your own mistakes. When you make mistakes, and you will make mistakes, you'll make mistakes whether you're consciously experimenting or not. Every leader makes mistakes. But when you do make mistakes, you need to be okay with it. Don't beat yourself up. Don't decide that you just aren't cut out to be a leader. Instead, treat it as a learning opportunity. Look back on what led to your decision. Did you have all the data you have now? Presumably not. So what were you missing? Did you make a decision too early? Was there some other way you could have avoided the mistake? Maybe not. That'll happen. But maybe it means there are things you need to put in place to make sure a similar mistake can't happen again. Or maybe you simply learned that the approach you took was not a good one. But be careful not to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Maybe that approach didn't work that time, but that doesn't necessarily mean it will never work. For example, if you give someone some feedback and it goes badly, maybe that's because it was a bad way to deliver the feedback, or maybe it's because the way you delivered it just wasn't right for that person. Maybe it'll be fine if you deliver feedback in the same way to someone else next time. Another way to put this is it's not a good idea to learn too broad a lesson from a mistake. Finally, number 8, this is the only one that's really not optional. Ask the people you lead. And I know this can be hard, again, because it involves showing some vulnerability, but it is really essential. These are the only people that really know how good you are as a leader, and their feedback will tell you a lot. But be careful how you ask. In many cases, if you ask a report, hey, how am I doing as a manager? They'll just tell you you're doing great and there's nothing you need to change. Or maybe if you push them, they'll come up with some tepid thing like they feel like you could give them a bit more critical feedback from time to time. I don't think there's a single best way to go about this, but what you want to ideally aim for is to allow your reports to feel completely safe with their feedback. And that can mean doing it anonymously. Sometimes you can achieve this by having someone else ask for the feedback on your behalf. So your HR department might do this, or your manager perhaps. But even this can leave people not feeling safe to be truthful if they're not in a high trust environment. Another thing that can help is just to ask the question often. If you ask it often enough, people will start to feel more like you really mean it, and also it'll feel less loaded. There are lots of ways to ask the question, but one formulation that might work for you is to ask, what do they need from you? What do they want you to do differently? Or your company might have a tool for sending around anonymous surveys with multiple choice questions, which can be useful if your team is big enough. The downside, of course, of anonymous feedback like this is that it can be really hard to tell what it really means. So non-anonymous feedback is almost always better if you can get it. But even anonymous feedback is better than no feedback at all. And once you've got the feedback, share it with your team and your manager as well, and explain to them all what you plan to do to develop. You might feel like this is a bad move, by the way, telling your boss and your reports what you're not good at. But remember, those people already know what they don't think you're great at. So if you pretend to think there's no problem, no room for development, then they know you're not telling them the whole story. And note, by the way, that none of this is possible if you and your team don't have good psychological safety. I talk about psychological safety in lots of my videos, but if you don't know what it's about, check out the video that's on screen now. If you have other ideas about how to develop leadership skills, please share them in the comments below. Bye. See you soon.